Next up, it's time to run the numbers, and that means business. Here with our business editor, Kate Moody, this evening. Hello again.
Hi, Charlie.
You're taking us back to that US-EU summit in Brussels and a resolution to a long-running trade dispute.
Yeah, the European Union and the United States reaching a breakthrough in their 17-year-long dispute over subsidies to Airbus and Boeing. It has been the longest-running trade fight in the history of the World Trade Organization, which had given the green light for both sides to impose punitive tariffs. Now, the two sides have agreed to suspend the duties for 5 years while they work on a permanent solution. The UK, which is involved as a former EU member, said it hopes for a similar deal in the coming days. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
It's the world's largest corporate trade dispute. A 17-year-long transatlantic tit-for-tat over aircraft subsidies to US plane maker Boeing and its European rival Airbus. Now a 5-year truce between the United States and the EU has been agreed as they work towards finding a more permanent solution.
This is the longest trade dispute in the history of WTO, so it's in our common interest to solve it.
After years of accusing each other of illegally subsidizing their aircraft manufacturers, the challenge now will be agreeing what kind of subsidies each can provide as Boeing and Airbus recover from the pandemic. In 2019, under then-President Trump, the US began imposing punitive tariffs on $7.5 billion worth of EU imports. The bloc retaliated the following year, with $4 billion in duties on American imports, after the WTO said that both sides were in the wrong. Tariffs were slapped on a wide range of companies, from winemakers in Europe to spirits producers in the United States, before being suspended in March pending talks. But the Airbus-Boeing dispute is just one of the ongoing transatlantic trade issues. Talks are continuing to resolve a separate route over tariffs on steel and aluminium exports.
Well, both Airbus and Boeing have welcomed that deal as a step towards a more level playing field and one that will allow them to better compete with growing competition from China. U.S. industry unions followed suit, saying the truce would protect aviation jobs. The aviation industry is struggling to recover from the pandemic, and negotiators will now have to agree on what state subsidies are going to be allowed on each side. There were similar expressions of relief from European food and drink producers whose products will no longer face 25% tariffs when they're sold in the United States. But Trump-era tariffs on European steel and aluminum remain in place, as do retaliatory tariffs on American whiskey and jeans, among other things. Those industries are calling on the Biden administration to continue its work to reset relationships with trade allies. Another outstanding trade issue is the threat of still more tariffs against EU member states over plans to tax digital giants. That dispute could be addressed in ongoing talks about global tax reform. Well, separately, the European Court of Justice has today ruled that privacy watchdogs in the bloc can investigate digital companies' use of data. The EU's Ireland-based privacy authority is accused of taking too long to resolve a growing number of complaints. The likes of Facebook, Google, Apple, and Twitter could now face more oversight from national regulators. U.S. retail sales slumped in May after 2 months of gains. Retail spending was 1.3% lower than in April, as Americans spent more on services like restaurants and travel rather than goods. Overall, consumer spending remains strong, and retail sales were 28% higher than they were last May. But analysts say it's not clear how long the recent spending spree will continue. The electronics and automobile sectors are facing shortages of all-important microchips, and global supply chains remain strained. Separately, production levels at U.S. factories rose 0.9%, while wholesale prices were up 0.8%. That will play into the ongoing debate about high inflation and whether the U.S. Federal Reserve is likely to change its monetary policy in response. Well, let's check in on the day's trading action. Investors are already looking ahead to the U.S. Central Bank's policy announcements, which will come tomorrow after a 2-day meeting. Wall Street is trending lower ahead of that, just a day after the S&P 500 and NASDAQ each hit record highs. The NASDAQ down about 0.75 of a percentage point with less than an hour of trade to go. The major European indices closed mostly higher, gains of about 1/3 of a percentage point in London, Paris, and Frankfurt. Shares of German steel conglomerate ThyssenKrupp dropped 7% after it emerged that those tariffs with the U.S. would remain in place. The furniture retailer IKEA has been ordered to pay 1.1 million euros in fines and damages after being found guilty of spying on employees and customers in France. The high-profile case focused on a campaign of fraudulent activity by the firm's French unit from 2009 to 2012. Mario Sofos reports.
Convicted by a French court of setting up a system to spy on employees, job applicants and unhappy customers, IKEA has been ordered to pay a fine of €1 million. Plaintiff and former employee Adel Amara, who helped expose the wrongdoing, says that while the sum might be a drop in the ocean for the major furniture retailer, it's nonetheless an important ruling for French justice.
In France, it's rare that big companies are convicted like this, so I'm happy. It's true that for IKEA, €1 million is nothing at all, but it is symbolic and we must be happy with the French judicial system.
2 former IKEA France executives were convicted, fined and given suspended prison sentences.
It's hard when you get 18 months, but that's how it is.
Defendant Jean-François Paris acknowledged to French judges that hundreds of thousands of euros a year were dedicated to such activities. Of the 13 defendants, some were acquitted and others given suspended sentences. Judges found that between 2009 and 2012, IKEA France used espionage to sift out disgruntled employees, including trade union representatives, as well as to profile dissatisfied customers. It involved the use of private detectives and illegally obtained police files. The court ruled that personal data was obtained by fraudulent means. IKEA France has not decided whether to appeal the court ruling.
An international cruise ship has docked in mainland Spain for the first time in over a year because of the coronavirus pandemic. The ship is operated by the travel giant TUI, and it's carrying 1,200 German tourists who've been instructed to keep in small, organized groups at all ports of call to avoid any potential contamination. In 2019, international cruises contributed about 2.8 billion euros to Spain's economy, amounting to 50,000 jobs. It's a crucial part of the tourism industry there. All passengers have had to provide 2 negative COVID tests, although there is no vaccination requirement. That's in line with Spain's regulations as it hopes to lure back tourists this summer. It is worth noting, perhaps, Charlie, that other cruise companies, notably those that are based in the United States, are requiring that passengers and staff be vaccinated. And that's been a source of some controversy there, where some states, Florida notably, are against requiring any proof of vaccination.
Obviously, these cruise companies hoping to avoid what we saw early in the pandemic of these outbreaks. Really bad PR for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they're hoping for, if you'll forgive the pun, smooth sailing ahead.
Got it. Looks like a lot of cruisers are ready to take the chance. Kate Moody with our business report this evening. Thank you so much.